Welcome to another edition of the Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and we continue our series of programs investigating Guyana's public policy, particularly the interaction or interrelation between domestic policy and foreign policy. And this month we've been dealing quite a lot with the Caribbean, and today we're going to deal with the Caribbean a little more because the fact is that most Guyanese living today were not yet born when Caricom was established in 1973. For us who were alive at the time, and I was, it was a time of excitement. As you know, there is a section of South Rhineville which is called Festival City, which was named after the Caribbean Festival of Arts. And then there's an avenue in North Georgetown called Carifesta Avenue. And Guyana was one of the first countries in the Caribbean to recognize the 4th of July as Caricom Day. Of course, the 4th of July has nothing to do with American independence. It was the day on which Forbes Burnham landed at Sewell Airport in Barbados and met Errol Barrow. And later, together with Bird of Antigua, the three of them decided to set up the Carifta. And of course, an approach was made to Trinidad and Tobago. And and remember, this was a time when Barbados, Antigua, and Guyana were not yet independent. So in less than a year after Forbes Burnham entered office, he took steps to launch the Caribbean Free Trade Association, which was finally established in 1968. So up to now, if you go down Carifesta Avenue, you'll see the flags of all of the CARICOM states. Many countries don't have that, but CARICOM is embedded in the psyche of the Guyanese nation. So it is an exciting time. And next year, we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Caribbean community. This year, of course, is 49th anniversary. So it is good for us to maybe look forward to see what CARICOM will be like, 50 years from now. Certainly, those of us who were alive at the time expected that we might be further along the road, but let us examine the issue of regional integration. We were fortunate to have four men of vision, men with a sense of mission, Errol Barrow of Barbados, Forbes Burnham of Guyana, Michael Manley of Jamaica, and Eric Williams. Those were the four independent states at that time. But these four men were visionaries. They understood what went on in the colonial period, and they wanted better for the Caribbean people. That was what inspired them. They wanted to protect these new states from the perils of post-independence dependency, the perils of economic marginalization, the perils of international domination. And don't forget, this was in the midst of the Cold War. So these four men saw far into the future. And of course, they were born early enough so they did not want to go back to the type of domination that had occurred in the past. We were happy to escape from colonialism, and we wanted to have a new regime. And this regime was one of Caribbean integration. Our founding fathers, Barrow, Burnham, Manley, and Williams, were convinced that if the Caribbean was to fulfill the aspirations of its peoples, aspirations for full employment, for improved standards of living, we had to be integrated. Our countries were too small and scattered, and integration was not an option. They felt it was an obligation. In fact, Forbes Burnham, even in 1967, the year after we became independent, advised Caribbean officials of the necessity for integration. And the message resonated in the Anglophone Caribbean. And in 1968, just 2 years after independence, we established the Caribbean Free Trade Association. And then in 1973, 5 years down the road, CARICOM was established. This was a tremendous change from what took place when the British were in charge, they tried to set up the West Indies Federation in 1958. After 4 years, it collapsed. The West Indies Federation collapsed. And in 1962, Trinidad went its way, became independent. Jamaica went its way and became independent. And that was the end of the federation. So without, going back into the past, Burnham, Barrow, Byrd, and Williams, and eventually Manley, all came together and established this Caribbean community, and it lasted 49 years, not the 4 years of the British West Indies Federation, but 49 years, and next year we'll be celebrating our anniversary. So it's very important that we examine Caricom and try to rectify its faults, so that we could next year look back to prosperity and look forward to prosperity and greater success. This was a time in the third world when other common markets were being established, particularly among the former colonies. The Central American Common Market was established in 1960. The East African Community was established in 1967. The Latin American Free Trade Association was established in 1962. The Economic Community of West African States established in 1975. So several former colonies saw the necessity for integrating, and the new states of the Caribbean couldn't remain apart. They couldn't confront these huge blocks on their own. So it was commonsensical for the new states to want to come together. And this is what Caricom was aimed at doing. This is what Caricom, did achieve to some extent. Now, the Caribbean is a peculiar geographical phenomenon. It lies between two huge continents, North and South America. It's what is called a sea lane of communication, SLOC. The strategic planners call it a sea lane of communication, obviously for military and strategic purposes. But it is a zone of danger. It is vulnerable to transnational crimes, human trafficking, gun running, narco trafficking. People trying to move contraband items from South America to North America. And of course, a lot of harmful things came from North America down to South America too. Caricom is spread over a vast area of 2,640,000 square kilometers of sea space. Now, no other economic community, ECOWAS, Central American Common Market, had to deal with 2,640,000 square kilometers of sea space. It maybe was an opportunity, but it was also an obstacle because shipping was essential to move goods and personnel. And Georgetown is 2,374 kilometers from Kingston in Jamaica. That is the distance. And without transport, without ships, without aircraft, it is difficult to, call the Caribbean a global village. It's difficult to communicate. It's difficult to conduct commerce among these states. And perhaps among these states, these 15 states scattered over the Caribbean Sea, we probably enjoy the lowest level of maritime trade. Other countries, had been bequeathed, the assets and resources, for, international trade. But, we didn't inherit any shipping lines from the British. And that has been a great obstacle to our commerce. And soon after we became independent, soon after Caricom was established, we started to run into some very serious international geopolitical problems. I think we recall that 10 years after Caricom was established, in October 1983, the United States invaded Caricom, invaded the Caricom state, that is Grenada, one of the most powerful states in the entire world invaded one of the weakest states, and that state happened to be a Caribbean state, the state of Grenada. And of course, it caused death and destruction. That's what happens with invasions. But worse than that, even if you can overcome the damage that was done, it divided the Caricom states between those that supported the United States invasion and those that opposed the United States invasion. And that rift has not healed fully. If you notice, or if you recall, a few weeks ago, I discussed the regional security system. Up to this day, or in fact, up to early this year, Trinidad, Belize, Bahamas, Guyana, never joined the RSS because of the divisions created in 1983 when those Caricom states, or some Caricom states, sided with the Americans to invade a fellow Caribbean state. So it has done a lot of damage. And then, of course, even before that, in 1976, 3 years after CARICOM was established, the Cubana aircraft, the CU-455, flight CU-455, I told you the story, how it took off from Georgetown, Guyana, went to Piarco in Trinidad, when it went to Barbados, Civil Airport, and when it took off from Barbados on its way to Jamaica, a bomb exploded, killing Caribbean citizens. And of course, 11 Guyanese died in that Cubana disaster. But it's not a disaster, it's a terrorist attack. And one of the reasons I figure for that terrorist attack was because those 4 Caribbean states, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Jamaica, were the ones who, in 1972, recognized Cuba, which at that time was in isolation in the Western Hemisphere. These 4 English-speaking states were courageous enough to recognize Cuba, and up to the present time, those states still call for the removal of the embargo, the blockade against Cuba, and have built cordial relations with Cuba throughout the Cold War. And the punishment for that was the bombing of the Cubana aircraft in October 1976. But so much for the Cold War. It means that our Caribbean states are bound together by blood and by more or less a common vision of what our countries deserve. Now, along the way, in 49 years, there have been issues, there have been problems. There has been some degree of non-fulfillment of the original objectives of the Caribbean community. And there have been attempts by Caribbean citizens, and one of the most important, perhaps the single most important, was the report of the West Indian Commission, Time for Action, which was published in 1992, 30 years ago. And that report presented a strategy for transformational change, problems that started to develop in the community. But that report was a strong recommendation. In fact, it had 225 separate recommendations for urgent action 30 years ago, urgent action. Well, it was meant to prepare the Caribbean community for the 21st century. So it came out 8 years before the century began, the new century began. But unfortunately, many of the recommendations were not fully implemented. And even more recently, in 2015, a new reform plan was proposed, a 5-year strategic plan, 2015-2019. That too, has expired without its objective being fulfilled. 3 years ago, that 5-year strategic plan has expired, and it presented new options for growth and development. The plan promised to address climate change, which is an ever-present problem, immigration, and we can see the problems with our brothers and sisters from Haiti, food security, it's a daily concern for Caribbean citizens in the midst of this pandemic, poverty and hunger. And when you consider the need for food and food security, you can see that the plan was visionary. It looked forward without even hearing about the pandemic. That plan proposed to deal with food security. But now we hear people talking about hemp and wheat. What people need is cassava and sweet potato. That is what people need to feed their children on a daily basis, not hemp. So we have to make sure that the plans don't run off the rails and that we continue to be inspired by the wisdom of the bureaucrats and technocrats who crafted these plans years ago. Last week, as you know, Caricom heads met. And this year, they met in Suriname. They meet every year around about the time of Caricom anniversary in July. And normally it's a 3 or 4 day meeting. And once again, the Caricom heads iterated the complaints that enough has not been achieved towards establishing the Caribbean single market and economy. They lamented the failure to fulfill the commitments on climate change, food security, and financing. My friends, every year, if you go back over Caricom heads of government meeting, you'll see the same complaints. That we have not done enough to implement the CSME. Now, when you understand that the CSME was conceptualized 33 years ago, in 1989, then you could understand that really, after 33 years, we have not fulfilled the requirements to implement that CSME. And who is to blame? Well, I'm not talking about blame today, but I'm saying that if we are to plan for the long term, if we are to plan for improvements in trade, in transportation, in logistics, in communication, in this vast ocean, this vast Caribbean Sea of over 2.6 million square kilometers, more needs to be done. People are hungry in this pandemic. People are poor, and the pandemic has not helped employment and food security. We live, all of the Caribbean states, whether you are a small island state, or whether you are a low-lying coastal state, because Belize, Suriname, and Guyana are low-lying coastal states, and the islands are all small islands. So the small island and low-lying coastal and developing states, call them the SIDS, there's got to be a new acronym for small island and low-lying coastal developing state. Let's call them the SIDS, nevertheless. All of our countries, without exception, have been adversely affected by climate change, global warming, and so, El Nino effect, all of these aberrations in climate. And every year, in the Caribbean, particularly the insular Caribbean, Trinidad and Guyana don't suffer so much, in Suriname, but many of the islands are threatened by hurricanes, and this is hurricane season. We wish them well. But agricultural production suffers. Immigration is intensified, increased. Because when you look at some of the catastrophes that have befallen the islands, Antigua, Barbuda, Dominica, Haiti, you can see that it's impossible for normal life to continue after these environmental disasters. And there has been an impact not only on the environment, but on people's incomes, on people's standard of living, and on the livelihoods, on food security. So the Caribbean region is at risk. The Caribbean region is at risk. And unless we deal with the challenges of climate change, things will get worse rather than get better. Apart from that, the Caribbean region as a whole has underperform in comparison with other regions. Our countries are plagued by crime, disease, environmental hazard, and poverty, as I told you, being on the sea lanes of communication between North and South American continents, the SLOC. We have been, the victims of transnational crime. Murder rates in the Caribbean are probably, per capita, the second highest in the world. 30 persons per 100,000 members of population. It is too high. It's unsustainable. It's an unsafe region, technically unsafe, and our community has to tackle this problem. Our countries also face challenges of migration of our educated population. A few years ago, a United Nations study, I think, pointed out that 80% of university graduates from Guyana migrated. So I apologize for that interruption. Hello, I apologize for that interruption. Yes, if I can return to where I stopped, can you see me start? I apologize for that interruption. I think there was some electronic fault there. As I was saying, the small island and low-lying coastal development states have been severely affected by the pandemic and, of course, climate change. But Caricom itself has developed important assets and resources and talents, I would say, to deal with the problems that we're facing. The secretariats, bureaucrats, and technocrats over the years have borne the brunt of planning and policy implementation. And these plans, of course, don't implement themselves. They depend on the heads of government. Caricom is based on 4 pillars: economic integration, foreign policy coordination, human and social development, and security. And to implement these policies, there are 5 councils. And these councils work. These councils are chaired by ministers from the Caribbean itself. There's the Finance and Planning Council, COFAP, the Foreign and Community Relations Council, COFCAR, the Human and Social Development Council, COSHAD, the National Security and Law Enforcement Council, the Council, and the Trade and Development Council, COTED. In addition to that, there is a plethora of other institutions, associate institutions, the CDB, CCJ, CLE, CXC. We all depend on these institutions, and without them, CARICOM couldn't function. My friends, in addition to all of these institutions, we need the Caribbean single market economy. This was mandated since 1989. And after 33 years, we need to move further along the road to implementing the requirements for a Caribbean single market economy. It is important for us to achieve sustained economic development based on international competitiveness. We're not on our own. We are competing with Central America, and Latin America, North America, and the rest of the world. There must be coordinated economic and foreign policy. There must be functional cooperation. There must be improvement or increase in trade and economic relations among our Caribbean states. But these efforts are being obstructed by trade barriers and transportation and logistical deficiencies. And in fact, there has been a refusal to remove some of the regulations which hinder the achievement of Caricom. Now, my friends, there is the question of Caricom's future. We are now, as I said, at 49th year. Next year, Caricom will celebrate its 50th anniversary. The question is for us, how will we overcome the challenges of the past 49 years? And how will we fulfill the aspiration of our founders? Not only the aspiration of our founders, but the hopes of our people who look forward to living in a community which is safe, where they can enjoy the minimum needs for prosperity, what they call the good life, good health and good housing, good education. And this is what we need to consider. The big question as we approach our 50th anniversary next year is how will Caricom be reformed? We've had, I think, a world-class report in 1992, 30 years ago. And we have a secretariat, we have bureaucrats and technocrats who could hold their own against any community in the world. And these plans that have been made are for the good of our people. It is for our governments at their annual meetings and in the day-to-day administration of the countries of the Caricom community. It is for these countries and their governments and their heads to take seriously the recommendations and the experience of 49 years to deliver to the Caribbean people the quality of life that they deserve, the quality of life that they desire. And I'm sure that if concerted action was taken to implement those recommendations and experiences of 49 years, we will, in the Caribbean, be able to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Caricom next year, 4th of July, in a much happier state than we are at present. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Each man must do his